Legend Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Their last days slipped by so inconspicuously that the world barely noticed they were gone, until in one jaw-dropping instant, everyone realized something was terribly wrong. For years, Gene Hackman was Hollywood's picture of strength, versatility, and raw talent, earning an endless list of accolades. At his side stood Betsy, a graceful presence whose gentle spirit and musical gifts at the piano gave her a charm all her own. They lived far from Los Angeles' chaos, tucked behind the adobe walls of a secluded home in Santa Fe, where each day seemed calmingly predictable: quiet mornings, soft melodies, and a handful of routine tasks. Then, out of the blue, they were found in a way no one could have imagined. No signs of a break-in, no struggle, no frantic calls for help. The only witnesses were the silent walls, the vast desert sky, and an old dog left without a heartbeat by their side. Inside, every lock was bolted, every room untouched, two still bodies frozen in time, leaving behind only a sea of questions nobody knew how to answer. Were Gene and Betsy keeping a pact hidden from the world? Could a secret illness have led to a final, heartbreaking decision? Or did something sinister slip through those quiet halls, leaving not so much as a scuff on the furniture? We're about to peel back the layers of one of Hollywood's most haunting riddles. But if you're expecting a neat conclusion, be warned. This story refuses to offer one. Instead, it presents a chorus of eerie twists and half-spoken murmurs, echoes that push us to rethink everything we believe about glamour, success, and the fragile borders of the human spirit. For nearly 2 decades, Gene Hackman withdrew from the spotlight that had once bathed him in everlasting applause. Gone were the bustling film sets, the late-night interviews, and the clamoring fans. In their place rose an adobe mansion in the heart of Santa Fe, New Mexico, draped in desert stillness. By all accounts, it was a peaceful sanctuary where Gene could savor his twilight years in calm reflection, a far cry from the Hollywood chaos he had left behind. Betsy Arakawa, his second wife, was the epitome of gentle composure. She was often seen in the upstairs window on breezy afternoons, letting fresh desert air blow through the house. Sometimes, neighbors caught echoes of her light piano tunes drifting out into the warm evening. 60-something, she displayed a quiet elegance that matched the desert's unhurried rhythms. Meanwhile, Gene, nearly 95 and no longer the towering presence he'd been in his youth, took slow, deliberate walks around the property with their loyal dog, whose graying muzzle hinted at as many years as its beloved owners. Those neighbors described the couple's life as utterly uneventful, but in a comforting way: groceries delivered weekly, routine medical visits that became infrequent as time wore on, and a household staff that was reduced to a handful of local workers who came only when needed. Strange as it might sound, that subdued rhythm was precisely what raised an alarm. One day, everything just stopped. Betsy's piano notes ceased. The dog no longer dozed on the front porch. Gene never came out to greet the maintenance team. It was this abrupt shift from calm to eerie silence that set the stage. The staff knocked on the door for days. They called out, circled around, peered through the windows, but the house seemed deserted, as though the world behind those thick adobe walls had vanished. Eventually, they had no choice but to break the lock, stepping into a place that felt suspended in time. Every piece of furniture was in its usual spot. There were no broken vases or scattered belongings. Even the lights were off, as if no one had been there to flip a switch for weeks. And in that haunting stillness, they made a discovery so perplexing that it rippled across the world. When the door finally opened, 2 things stood out immediately: how tidy everything was and how unnaturally quiet it felt. Visitors later described an almost suffocating hush, as though the walls themselves had forgotten how to echo. Down a short hallway leading from the entrance was Gene Hackman, lying in the mudroom with his glasses just inches from his limp hand. There was no sign of struggle on his body, no bruises, no indication that he had tried to brace himself for a fall. It was as if the life within him had simply flickered off before he had a chance to shout or reach for the phone. Not far away, in a small bathroom near the living room, lay Betsy. At her feet were a few pill bottles, one partially emptied. Had she overestimated her dosage? Or had she intentionally taken more than she should? The scene offered no clear answers, only more enigmas. The bathroom was orderly, with no spilled water, no shattered mirrors, no sign of panic. Side down the hallway, the Hackman's loyal dog was found lifeless, peacefully curled up as though simply dozing. No footprints. No forced entry. No broken windows or locks. Everyone who entered that house was struck by the surreal neatness. It was an unwavering calm that seemed at odds with the tragedy of two people lying cold on the floor. After combing through the rooms, local investigators concluded there had been no intruder. They found no hints of physical violence. Yet the question wouldn't go away. What on earth caused both Gene and Betsy, and even their dog, to meet an end like this? Sheriff Aiden Mendoza gave the first official statement. He confirmed that the bodies were in a state indicating they'd been gone for days, potentially weeks. The medical examiner's preliminary observations couldn't pinpoint an exact timeline. Decomposition was minimal, likely due to Santa Fe's dry desert climate. As for a cause of death, they were at a standstill. No outward harm, no obvious toxins at first glance. While the entire world braced itself for a classic Hollywood scandal, the truth was far murkier than any script could conjure. Hollywood thrives on drama, and the minute word got out about Gene Hackman's mysterious end, theories ignited like sparks hitting dry brush. Fans on social media began tossing out every possibility, from an undetected gas leak to the notion that the couple had formed a secret pact to leave the world on their own terms. The story of an aging icon who chose to slip away from life in hush-hush unity with his beloved wife was all too seductive for the rumor mill to resist. More outlandish theories involved hush money payoffs or the idea that the dog's passing was a clue pointing toward carefully administered poison. Some internet groups examined aerial photos of the estate's ventilation system, hypothesizing that a colorless gas had seeped into each room. Others insisted that the lack of any sign of struggle meant the couple must have made a final decision together, a vow to exit life simultaneously rather than watch the other suffer. But that's the nature of an unsolved puzzle. It invites every wild possibility. Gene's official retirement had taken him far from public life, fueling imaginations that maybe he'd retreated for reasons more ominous than just wanting peace. Betsy's reclusive tendencies and long history with medications prescribed for various ailments were singled out as potential keys to a deeper plot. The fact that the dog was found so calmly near them led some to wonder if something in the air had quietly lulled them all to eternal rest. In short, the swirl of guesses was almost as thick as the desert dust. Everyone wanted clarity, but clarity never came. Instead, each rumor, each speculation only fed the growing cloud of uncertainty enveloping Gene and Betsy's final days. And ironically, the more sensational the theories became, the harder it was to see even a glimmer of real truth. While the public reveled in conspiracies, a more intimate human drama was unfolding behind the curtains, the painful reality of Gene Hackman's estranged relationships with his children. Decades ago, Gene had married his first wife, Faye, and together they had 3 kids, Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie. During his meteoric rise in Hollywood, Gene's schedule took him away for months at a time. Red carpet events replaced family dinners. Long shooting schedules overshadowed birthdays and school recitals. Those children grew up without a father figure who could be consistently present. When Gene divorced Faye after 3 decades of marriage, the entire family fracture became painfully evident. Children, now young adults, had built lives that didn't revolve around him. They loved him in the way children love a distant star, but they also resented the fact that his devotion to Hollywood seemed to eclipse his role as a parent. That tension never really healed. Even after Gene remarried Betsy Arakawa, forging a second chance at life and love, those old wounds lingered like silent scars. As the world mourned Gene's abrupt departure, his children were forced back into the glaring spotlight they had spent years avoiding. Reporters hounded Christopher, the eldest, for comments. Elizabeth, famously quiet, refused all interviews, hoping her single statement, "I only want him to rest in peace," would close the book on her father's complicated legacy. Leslie, the youngest, had tried her hand in the entertainment world but never escaped the weight of her father's name. The news, hungry for any personal angle, began rehashing stories of missed graduations, stilted phone calls, and birthdays celebrated in Gene's absence. Old family photos, faded Polaroids from simpler times, were splashed across tabloids. Gene's children had avoided him for years, and now they were confronted with the finality of never being able to say what had been left unsaid. The tension that had colored their relationships was, in its own way, a puzzle piece in the tragedy, a reminder that even legends cast long shadows that can overshadow those they leave behind. If there's one thing Hollywood does impeccably, it's turning real-life tragedy into an ongoing spectacle. The moment the story broke, hordes of journalists descended upon Santa Fe, swarming the Adobe mansion's perimeter with cameras and questions. They grilled neighbors, longtime friends, and even local mail carriers, hoping to find anything that could clarify this riddle. When the police confirmed there were no signs of forced entry and no trace of violence, the rumor mill only doubled in volume. Suddenly, every half-baked theory floated by fans online was treated like potential fact. Some tried to spin a narrative of a secret Hollywood curse that had claimed other icons under mysterious circumstances. Others pointed to Betsy's rumored history with depression, claiming that mental health issues could have played a role. Then there were those who insisted that old age alone must have carried them off. Yet none of these angles could fully explain the dog lying motionless nearby, or why the house was left in such impeccable order. At one point, Christopher Hackman reluctantly stepped in front of the cameras. His statement was intended to be simple. The family was waiting for official toxicology results. But to the press, that sentence was a bombshell. Waiting for tests implied they, too, suspected something might have contributed to the tragedy, something beyond natural causes. Within hours, headlines plastered across the internet twisted Christopher's words into wild assumptions of covert toxins, shadowy vendettas, or carefully orchestrated exits. Truth was that in situations like this, clarity rarely appears overnight. Toxicology screenings can take weeks, even months. But the media, with its around-the-clock news cycle, thrives on immediacy. Day by day, new angles emerged. UFO conspiracies, old Hollywood feuds, even whispers of a hidden diary. Each rumor threatened to overshadow the simplest possibility. Sometimes real life is so fragile it barely makes a sound when it ends. The rumor mill was a raging storm. The official investigation was like a methodical boat sailing through it, determined not to be capsized by gossip. Early forensic findings indicated that both Gene and Betsy had ingested prescription medications that could cause drowsiness, a slowing heart rate, and eventually cessation of breathing if taken above the recommended amount. Yet these pills were not lethal in typical doses, and neither body displayed the typical signs of having violently ODD. Foul play was involved. It was unbelievably subtle. The dog's body was similarly perplexing. Initial tests revealed no trauma and no immediate sign of a particular toxin. Could an airborne agent have incapacitated them all at once? Investigators examined every vent, every gas line, and every potential hazard that might leak odorless fumes. They found nothing conclusive. No suspicious chemicals, no tampered valves. Thank you for watching and exploring this enigma with me. If you found yourself as intrigued and unsettled as the rest of the world, remember that every headline we read is a snapshot of a far deeper story. Sometimes the real explanations lie in places we can't see or prove. Stay curious. There's always more to uncover beneath the surface.